Hey everybody, Dr. Seegren here, and we got Rosie, the camera woman. Thank you for your help. So we're going to do another virtual lab today, and this topic is going to be the greenhouse effect. And so our experiment, you can come take a closer look at it here, is we have 3 bottles set up, each one with a thermometer inside, and each one is made up of a different gas. So the bottle on your left is just normal air. The bottle in the middle is going to be full of carbon dioxide, and the bottle on the right is full of methane. Carbon dioxide I got from a chemical reaction, and the methane I got actually from my stove just a few moments ago. So that is our part of our experiment, and then we're going to turn on these heat lamps and basically bake them in sunlight, or artificial sunlight. And then we have a trash bag below them, which is going to absorb a lot of that sunlight's radiation. So before we start, let's go over some of the science. All right, so this is a kind of diagram of our experiments here. We've sort of got 2 rough scenarios. We've got a normal air scenario, and then we have greenhouse gas scenario. We're also going to break it down and compare 2 different greenhouse gases. We'll get into that in a little bit. So let's just think conceptually, what's going on with normal air versus a greenhouse gas. And the exact same thing is happening on planet Earth all the time. So basically we have a light source, and so we have sunlight or light coming in to our bottle, like so. The bottle is clear, so the sunlight's going to pass through the bottle. And then it's going to hit this dark surface of the trash bag. And when sunlight hits a dark surface, you'll probably notice if you go outside with a black t-shirt on, you'll notice that it gets really, really warm. That's because black surfaces convert sunlight into heat. And that generates something called infrared radiation. All heat sources generate it. So what's going to happen is that sunlight's going in, and what's going to be reflected off of the black trash bag, the dark surface, is going to be infrared radiation. This is where it gets interesting. Normal air does not really interact very much with infrared radiation. So what we would expect is basically the infrared radiation to move through the normal air and pass out the other side. Greenhouse gases do interact with infrared radiation. When infrared radiation hits a greenhouse gas, it kind of holds onto it and actually will begin to heat up. And so what we expect is that this infrared radiation gets trapped as heat inside of our bottle with greenhouse gases. The exact same thing is happening on Earth every moment of every day. Human pollution creates greenhouse gases. They go up into the atmosphere. As sunlight comes into the atmosphere, it hits planet Earth, generates some heat. The heat wants to reflect back off of Earth, but it can't because the greenhouse gases trap the heat. So our expectation would be that our normal air might heat up a little bit, but not very much, whereas our greenhouse gas bottle should heat up more. What do you think? Is it going to actually work? Our next comparison is we have 2 different kinds of greenhouse gases that you've learned a little bit about so far: carbon dioxide and methane. Carbon dioxide generally comes from burning fossil fuels and various industrial processes. So anytime we're burning coal, oil, and gas, or certain industrial processes like making concrete, those generate carbon dioxide. Generally, methane is made by agricultural processes like growing rice, or cattle actually burp and fart a lot of methane. And so those are big sources of methane. We have 2 different bottles, one with carbon dioxide, one with methane. What do you think is actually going to trap more heat? The carbon dioxide or the methane? So you can see that's our experiment here. And over here, on the right side is where I'm going to be collecting data from the experiment. So we have 3 thermometers inside the bottles. They're going to be keeping track of how hot the bottles get. They're not quite all calibrated properly. So one thermometer at time 0, right now, before we even start the experiment, it's reading about 22.3 degrees. One thermometer is reading about 28 degrees and one is reading about 24 degrees. Don't worry, it's not that big of an issue. As long as you heat up the thermometer, it all, a degree is a degree for each one, which I hope it is. But that could be a source of error, is this difference in these thermometer readings. It should work out because what we want to see is how the temperature changes in each bottle. So what we're going to do is record the temperature. We're going to watch on a time lapse. And we're going to record the temperature at 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, and 150 minutes. That's 1 hour, 2 hours, 2.5 hours we're going to watch this. And here at the bottom, we are going to graph how the temperature changes over time. So we're not going to graph just the overall temperature. We're going to compare how much it increases for each bottle over time. All right, let's get started with the first 30 minutes. All right, it's been 30 minutes, and so far our normal air, the temperature went from 22.5 to 28. I'm rounding just to 5. The thermometer's not that accurate, so if it seems like it's closer to the middle, I'll call it a 0.5. Carbon dioxide has gone from 28 to 34.5, and methane has gone from 34 to 30. So the overall temperature is now what's important. We want to know the change of temperature. So we really want to compare these two numbers. These two numbers and these two numbers. And so let's see, 28 minus 22.5, that's a change of 5.5. 28 to 34.5, that's a change of 6.5. And 24 to 30 is a change of 6. So, all right. So we're seeing some slight differences so far. Let's go ahead and update our graph. So if we're looking at the overall trends here, so far the lead is going to CO2, carbon dioxide, but just by a smidge, followed by methane, followed by normal air. We'll see if that trend holds. Hopefully there's some bigger and more major changes as we let this go on further and further. Let's see. All right, another update. It's been an hour. T60. What we've seen in the normal air, I'm eyeballing it. I don't see it moving at all. It looks like it's still at 28 to me, so it's gained 0 degrees, and it's still only changed 5.5 degrees. The carbon dioxide bottle has moved slightly. It has gone up by about 0.5 degree, and the methane bottle has also moved up by about 0.5 degree. So let's update our graphs. I changed the scale a little bit. So the scale on the graph I had going from 3 to 24. The changes were happening pretty fast earlier, but now they seem to be slowing down a lot, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I changed the scale so that the bottom is basically 5 degrees, 5.5, 6, 6.5, so that we can see the differences, small differences a little bit easier. All right, so we noticed a couple patterns. It appears that the greenhouse gases, they're still chugging up a little bit here at an hour. We'll see if they keep chugging up even more or not. Whereas the normal air seems to have stabilized. So, what do you make of that? Why do you think normal air is not going up anymore, whereas greenhouse gases are going up more and more? Okay, that's question number 1. Question number 2 is, Why? So we saw this giant jump initially. In the first 30 minutes, it jumped 5.5 degrees in even normal air, 6.5 in the carbon dioxide, 6 in the methane. So you saw this really big jump at first, and then now it's either not moving at all or just tiny, tiny, tiny increments. What do you think is going on with that? Why such a difference in the rate of change? You know, it shot up and then it's kind of slowing down. So I'll tell you what I kind of make of it, and let's go over here to the science, and it actually can inform our view of the science and our view of global warming a little bit here. We talked about how, you know, sunlight's going in, it's generating heat, infrared radiation, some of that's going to get passing through the bottle again. Greenhouse gas bottles, those should trap some of that heat, more of it than the normal air. But we definitely could expect, you know, of course, we're shining a light on a trash bag, it's going to get warmer in this area. There's going to be some heat buildup, but we're appearing to see a bigger heat buildup in our greenhouse gas bottle. But after some heat is built up, it's the buildup of heat kind of slows down over time. And when you think about it, that kind of makes sense. It's not like we've created a system that is just going to get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter forever. It's not like it's gonna, if we let this experiment go long enough, it's gonna get 1,000,000 degrees in here. Eventually it's gonna get so hot that some of the heat has to escape back out into the environment. So as this gets hotter and hotter and hotter, eventually some of this heat is gonna begin escaping out of the bottle, and we'll expect it to kind of reach an equilibrium where the amount of heat going in and the amount of heat going out is about the same, and so it's not getting any hotter inside. And really what we're comparing is the equilibrium that is met comparing these two scenarios. One with normal air and one with more greenhouse gases. Earth would likely kind of work the same way. You know, as we keep adding more and more pollution to Earth's atmosphere, we keep burning more gasoline, coal, oil, gas, and keep going about the deforestation and agricultural practices that we're doing, we can expect Earth is going to keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter as we add more and more and more greenhouse gases. But it's not like going to turn into like the sun one day. It's not going to get like infinitely hot. Eventually, if we stop, it will kind of reach an equilibrium. But unfortunately for us, unless we take the greenhouse gases out of the bottle, it's going to be a lot hotter than it would have been otherwise. So there you go. That's some interesting food for thought for you as we continue to watch for another hour and a half. I'm curious to see if there's any other changes that are going to happen. All right, so here's another update. At hour and a half, my time-lapse camera is beeping at me that it's running out of batteries, so we'll see how much longer that lasts. But I'll keep recording data for another hour. I'm looking, you know, I'm kind of eyeballing the temperature and really trying to get an idea of it because these are pretty small changes at this point. As far as I can tell, this one still has not changed. It might be 28.1 or something, but for the most, nothing significant. So another 0 here. Carbon dioxide increased a smidge. It was borderline 35 to 35.5 last time. I would say it's solidly 35.5 now. So we'll say it increased another 0.5 degree. Methane definitely increased about 0.5 degree. From my eye, it seems like methane is starting to catch up to carbon dioxide. So I'm going to be very, very curious to see if it eventually overtakes it. So far, it has not. Carbon dioxide, if we add up all the changes so far, normal air has changed by 5.5 degrees, and that was all within the first 30 minutes. Carbon dioxide has changed by 6.5, 0.5, so 7.5 degrees, and methane has changed by 7 degrees. So still carbon dioxide is the winner, but from my eye, it looks like methane is maybe starting to catch up a little bit. So I'll keep an eye on it. Let me update the graph. So yep, So you can see, greenhouse effect is still chugging along here. All right, so let's take a look at the data. We're at a 2-hour mark here, and what we noticed, normal air didn't change again. Carbon dioxide also didn't change, but methane kept increasing by about a half a degree each 30 minutes. Actually, maybe even a bit more. So what that looks like is that basically normal air, it increased, but then it leveled off very quickly. Carbon dioxide increased even more, but then it leveled off. Methane increasing, still increasing, even at the 2-hour mark. So we'll see where it ends up at. So right now, carbon dioxide and methane are currently tied, although methane may take the lead here in the last 30 minutes. I'm kind of wondering why this is, and my hypothesis initially, based off what I know and what other scientists have done research on, methane should be a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. In other words, it should trap more heat than carbon dioxide. But we weren't really seeing that, and I noticed that I positioned everything, I put the bottles in place, I tried to put the camera in place and everything, but I think I may have been shining the lights a little bit more on the normal air and carbon dioxide, and methane maybe wasn't quite getting the same amount of light as the other two, and maybe that's why it was kind of a little bit slower to catch up to carbon dioxide, but now it's caught up. I've adjusted the lights slightly so it's a little bit more balanced too, and so we'll see where it ends up now. But that does point out some interesting science. Let me ask you, what would happen to this effect if we reduced the amount of sunlight or light coming in to our bottle? So again, we still have the exact same experiment, but we just reduced the amount of sunlight. What do you think would happen to the temperature changes? Yeah, so if you imagine that you cut out some of the sunlight and there's less sunlight reaching the plastic bag, that means there's less heat being generated by the plastic bag, and therefore less heat that can potentially be captured by the greenhouse gas. And actually that is a good lesson to learn. The amount of sunlight coming in to Earth is actually definitely part of this equation of the greenhouse effect. And actually there's some scientists currently proposing different ways to block out the sun out here in the atmosphere. And basically what I mean by blocking out the sun is basically putting something in the atmosphere that reflects sunlight so that sunlight bounces back into space and never even interacts with our greenhouse effect in the first place. So the idea is that you could reduce the amount of temperature increase caused by our pollution and our greenhouse gases by basically just cutting out the amount of sunlight hitting Earth. That'll be a topic that we discuss in our in one of the next YouTube lectures that I talk about. All right, well, we got 30 more minutes left. Let's see if methane takes the lead now. I'm excited. All right, so we made it to the end of this experiment. Here we are at the 2.5-hour mark, and what we saw is no change in normal air, no change in carbon dioxide, another half a degree for methane. And so overall in the end, methane was the winner. Normal air increased by 5.5 degrees, so it increased by a decent amount and then it never increased again. Carbon dioxide increased by even more, 7.5 degrees overall in the end, and it even leveled off at the end. And methane was really just a little train that just kept chugging along, increased, and then kept increasing pretty consistently after that, and ended up at plus 8 degrees. So we can see that overall carbon dioxide increased 2 degrees more than normal air, and methane increased 2.5 degrees more than normal air. So methane had a little bit stronger effect in the end, but it also took a little bit longer for it to reach its equilibrium. So we're going to finish with 3 final questions. The first question is, what did you learn from this experiment? Kind of summarize the results, what overall happened. All right, the second thing is that, like any good scientist, when you do an experiment, you should take a step back and kind of look back and look at how it went, what you learned from it, and think about what could have gone wrong here. So what mistakes could we have made that could have messed up this data or altered the results in some way? You saw everything I did. I kind of showed you my setup. I even described some things that I noticed maybe had gone wrong. So think about that. What could have gone wrong here? That's called sources of error. And then the third thing that's always good to do when you finish an experiment is to consider what sorts of things could we improve on, or what sorts of new questions could we ask. So let's tackle those one at a time. Is there anything that I could have done, you think, that could have improved the experiment or gotten us maybe better results or more accurate results? Go ahead and answer that. And now that you've kind of seen my overall setup here, what are some new questions that you could ask and do an experiment on that would basically take the setup but just kind of ask a different question? So what could you tweak about this setup that could basically, the question we answered is the greenhouse effect real? Can we measure it? Does the greenhouse gas actually capture heat? And was there a difference between carbon dioxide and methane? So what other kinds of questions could you ask on this subject? All right, so I will leave it there. I hope you learned something. I hope you found that interesting. I was pleased at the beginning. I wasn't really sure how it was going to end up because there wasn't too big of a change. But then as we kept going over time, we saw bigger and bigger changes between greenhouse gases and normal air. And probably we'll see the same effect on Earth, that basically as time goes on, we'll see bigger and bigger changes with this greenhouse effect. Cool.